In this week's full-length episode, we're going to talk about the E.O. Green shooting, which is also known as the murder of Larry King. There are a lot of different names regarding this case, but it also kind of depends on what side of the case you're on, which there are two sides of it, which I did not know before I started researching it. Just as a side note, Caitlin and I both went to E.O. Green Junior High.
And that's why when you were telling me that, like, there's people that, like, somehow think it was justified, like...
Yeah, and we'll get to that.
That, like, kind of blew my mind because I only heard stories of, like, how awful and sad it was.
So I remember it happening. We were all still in elementary school, so we went to Richard Bard Elementary School, and we went on a lockdown because they were in our school district. So I remember it happening, and, like, Mom saying something about it, and, like, how awful it was.
You were pretty young.
I was, I think, in, like, 1st or 2nd grade.
Yeah. To clarify, we were not in school at E.O. Green Junior High School in Oxnard, California at the time of the shooting. We did not go for, like, another year, couple years, 2 years.
I was, like, 3 years behind
2 or 3 years later. Yeah. And Abby never went to that school because we moved.
It was 2008. So I was in 1st grade. I was 6.
So, yeah. So that means I would have been in, like, 4th. So a couple years later. 3 years later for me. 4 years. 2 years for Caitlin. We went there.
It was only 2 years. Wow.
But yeah, again, it was like one of those things that we went on lockdown, our school did. And so it's kind of this weird case because we feel semi-connected to it, and we eventually went to the same school. It was like an isolated incident, which we'll talk about. So it wasn't like the school was... I mean, it wasn't the best
It wasn't like the
school.
most amazing school, but that's just the area.
Yeah, but it wasn't nearly as bad. It wasn't like that this school itself had a lot of that kind of violent issues. Probably some fights here and there, as
although
most
it
junior
did,
highs.
like, well, that area had a lot of it was like gang territory.
It is, yeah.
Like, that's why we had a uniform. Because
and there was, like, gates, remember?
There was a lot of gang-related violence, for sure.
Yeah, I mean, like, in the school itself, like, there was, like, fights, which happen at most junior high and high schools, but there wasn't really a ton of violence this severe.
Yeah.
So let's just jump right into the actual meat and potatoes of the episode. So I'm going to talk about the who. There are two main characters in the case. Obviously, Larry King, and then the young man at the time. Now he's much older, but the young man at the time who shot and killed him. So Lawrence Phobes King, which I'll refer to as either King or Larry going forward. I believe that he was called Larry mostly, was born on January 13th, 1993, so he's only like a year older than Caitlin is, or would have been a year older than Caitlin is now.
No, 4 years.
Oh, 4 years. Sorry, I thought you were
Math is hard. We're going to say that every single episode now.
His mother was a drug addict and a prostitute, and his father had abandoned them, so this guy's track record is starting off poor. Larry and his younger brother, who was a newborn at the time, were adopted by Gregory and Dawn King in 1995. So Larry was only 2 years old at the time.
Oh, wow.
He had diagnosed ADHD and was on medication for it. According to Gregory King, who's his adopted father at this point, he was diagnosed with reactive attachment disorder.
That makes sense.
And which is a condition where a child fails to develop relationships with his or her caregivers, and
it negatively affects the relationships you make for the rest of your life.
That'll
like,
make
you either like really want affection from every single person you meet, or you like can't form actual relationships,
so
or it negatively it's a huge, when you're an infant, like, and through your childhood, like, that's the most formative years of a child's development, honestly. Like,
and that'll make more sense as to why Gregory and Dawn King react the way they do to this murder, which is a little odd. Just side
kind
note
of
there.
sad, right? Isn't that what you said?
Yeah. So Larry came out as gay at 10 years old, and he was openly gay. He dressed more feminine. I'll just say that. That's how I'll put it. There are, like, people that give testimony that says he was a cross-dresser. I don't know the extent of it. He did wear, like, high heels and makeup often, and occasionally dresses. Not to school, as we know. Green there was a uniform. And we'll get into that too about the uniform, and that did come into play. Like, is he breaking uniform policy?
I remember that.
So he was bullied by his peers like for his entire life, but especially once he came out as gay. Think about this in 2000, like, what, if he was 10 years old, this would have been probably 2004.
Yeah, about.
So think about how much less people were, like, open to people being gay and transgender or whatever he identified as. It's not super clear. He did call himself gay, but then...
But it was a different time.
But, yeah, and then Gregory, who is his adoptive father, said a few times that Larry had told him, Gregory, that he was bisexual, but then there was a report that said that he had told people to call him Letitia. So I'm not 100% sure. Those are kind of the facts.
He
That's
didn't
what I
know.
have.
He was
young, and again, it was a different time. It wasn't like a different time, but it was 10 plus years ago. So things were different back then. I'll just put it at that.
Yeah. He probably didn't have the words to describe what he
I also
was.
think that it wasn't as common at that time period for people to, like, go by different pronouns or, like, a different name.
Well, yeah, no. That
wasn't a thing. So,
yeah.
I mean, he could have been non-binary. Like, we don't know that. And so I think that maybe either he didn't know or he was kind of just non-binary. It could be either.
Yeah, maybe. And for as much as people were unaccepting of gay people back then, they were even more unaccepting of people who were non-binary or transgender.
So he took, like, a middle ground almost between, like, maybe who he really was and who people thought he was, if that makes sense.
Yeah, totally.
So then at age 12, he was placed on probation for theft and vandalism. This is a weird fact. He was placed on probation for theft and vandalism after taking food from the fridge at the home he was living in.
That seems weird
yeah.
that he got charged for that.
I don't know. That was, like, a weird fact that I found, and I was like, that doesn't make any sense because I thought that he was adopted. I don't know. Anyway, moving on from that. Point I'm trying to make there with that sentence is that he was
maybe not in the best home.
Not in the best home, and also he had, I guess, issues with the law, very vaguely. In 2007, he was removed from his adoptive home, and placed in the group home and treatment center Casa Pacifica after he alleged that his adoptive father was physically abusing him, a claim that Gregory did deny multiple times. Okay, next person in the story is Brandon David McInerney. Was born on January 24th, 1994 in Ventura, California. Larry was also born in Ventura, California. I don't know if I mentioned that. Brandon's mother, Kendra, had a criminal history and was addicted to meth. So again, his track record does not start off very well either. And she did accuse her husband, William, of shooting her in the arm after, like, a dispute. Between August 2000 and February 2001, William McInerney, which is Brandon's father, had contacted CPS 5 different times to express his concern about his son living with Kendra, who was his biological mother. By 2001, William placed a restraining order against Kendra, and then by 2004, Brandon was placed in custody of his father. So,
which is 3 years of
So who knows
abuse.
exactly what went on in the house? I don't know if there was, like, physical abuse from Kendra to Brandon, or if there was just, like, a really horrible household, like no money, no proper care. That's kind of unclear, but by 2004 he would have been 8. So now on to the what section of the who, what, where. This is gonna get a little, eventually it will get graphic, so just kind of a fair warning to you guys that this is not
not a happy
ending case, and not like a it's very violent. I'll say that. There we go. King was more accepted once he entered junior high at E.O. Green Junior High School, which was 7th grade. He had a group of girls that he hung out with regularly and sat with, like, at lunch and everything. However, as probably you guys could expect, he was bullied by boys in gym class who bullied him for specifically wearing women's clothing, accessories, high heels, and makeup, which kind of started in January of 2008, it sounds like. This is where it gets kind of tricky with the whole dress code issue. Some teachers believed he was violating the dress code, but California anti-discrimination laws prevent discrimination based on gender, including like gender expression. So he was able to dress in more feminine clothing and wear makeup and wear high heels all he wanted, because that technically itself wasn't breaking dress code.
Like he could just wear the female dress code.
Yeah, and like a woman
Which,
could
good on
do
you,
that.
California.
Yeah.
Yeah, and so the thing is a lot of teachers were like, well, but still, he's causing a distraction. But there's a lot of like gray area, because it's like, well, if a girl wore like a low cut shirt and was being a distraction, but she was still within dress code, like where is the truth here, kind of thing.
It's up for interpretation by the administration.
Yeah, so the assistant principal, Joy Epstein, she was the one that really was like, okay, this is fine. He's just expressing himself differently than other people might want him to, but we can't technically tell him how to dress or to stop acting more feminine and dressing more feminine. Then it says that he had been asked to be called Letitia. Again, I mentioned that earlier. I'm just going to leave it at that because I'm not going to try to speculate on what his like exact identity was. On January 29th, 2008, so this is like less than 2 weeks before the shooting, assistant principal Sue Parsons emailed every teacher at the school, and this is quotes, "We have a student on campus who has chosen to express his sexuality by wearing makeup. It is his right to do so. Some kids are finding it amusing, others are bothered by it. As long as it does not cause classroom disruptions, he is within his rights. We are asking that you talk to your students about being civil and non-judgmental. They don't have to like it, but they do have to give him his space. We are also asking you to watch for possible problems. If you wish to talk further about it, please see me or Joy Epstein." So basically she's saying like, he's allowed to do this.
Leave the kid
alone, but also watch out for problems.
Probably meaning watch out for other students.
Watch out for bullies. Yeah, bullying. Extensive bullying. Because I will say this, there is name calling like in any school, anywhere that you go to, no matter what. Like, you'll get name called for just being relatively normal, so to speak. Mm-hmm. Or, I guess I don't want to call... anyway, you can get name called for frickin' anything, is the point I'm trying to make there. And so, like, there's name calling that happens in middle schools, but I think what they're trying to say is if there is, like, hateful bullying related to hate speech sort of things, then there's gonna have to be something fixed there. Mm-hmm. So that was January 29th, 2008. And then now we're gonna move on to like the what of the shooting. So on about 1 or 2 days before the shooting, King walked onto the basketball court during the middle of a game and asked McInerney to be his Valentine in front of team members, who then proceeded to make fun of McInerney.
Well, and isn't that one of the big issues is, like, he himself was getting bullied, and so, like...
Yeah, so, a lot of the media coverage on this was based on this, like, one sentence that he had asked him to be his Valentine in front of a bunch of other people. Some... possibly to Brandon's like mind, making it seem like he was like they were like Brandon thought that everyone else thought that, okay, people think that me and Larry are actually going to are actually like in like a relationship, kind of is what that seems like to me.
Well, and the fact that you say like the Valentine part was like super relevant to the story in the media.
Yeah, Valentine Road is the name of the documentary.
The name of the documentary, yeah.
Mm-hmm. And this did get huge media coverage, which we'll talk about that in a little bit too. So that's kind of the catalyst, it seems like, was that specific event. On February 11th, which was the day before the shooting, King yelled to McInerney in a corridor This is a school in Southern California, so everything's outside except for the classrooms themselves. So you can, like, yell to people and it wouldn't be, like, super jarring.
No,
because you're
it's outside.
It's outside. All the hallways, per se,
which
are
is
outside.
what a corridor is, basically. He said, "Love you, baby." And then later that day, King was parading, is what the article said, back and forth in front of McInerney and a group of other boys who were hanging out with McInerney. And he was in high-heeled boots and makeup. Larry King was. The group of boys were laughing at McInerney, and he was getting visibly upset. Then there was, like, this tidbit that said that a teacher was watching this entire situation happen, and allegedly she looked at Brandon McInerney and, like, wagged her finger, like, saying, like, no, 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 like, don't get mad, don't get upset, kind of thing. Interesting.
Well, in defense of the teachers, I don't know that any of them, like, saw any super big red flags. Like,
which we'll get into that too. But it's weird to me because I think that if Brandon was getting, like, laughed at and bullied in front of, like, his friends, I mean, I could see why he was getting upset.
Oh, totally.
Right?
Absolutely.
That makes sense to me.
But I can also see how there was no huge red flags.
I also think the teachers probably felt like they needed to tread really lightly because
it was such a sensitive subject.
A very sensitive subject, and so...
And a very, not discovered subject either, really. Like, up until this point, it was kind of like one of those things, like, okay, if you're gay, like, just don't tell anybody. Like, just live your life.
Well, yeah,
but
there
don't
was
tell
a
anyone.
whole, like,
and
don't ask, don't tell. That recently went away.
There were a lot of teachers who... There was one specific, I can't remember her name, we'll talk about it later because she is in, like, the testimony part, who said that she had a pretty good relationship with Larry King, but she told him multiple times, don't wear makeup, don't wear women's clothing, don't wear high heels, don't do anything that's going to bring attention to you.
She's probably worried for his safety.
Yeah. And then
as an adult, like, you have the hindsight to be like, this could get violent really quickly.
Right. And then... Like I said, the group of boys was laughing at McInerney, and he was getting visibly upset. McInerney, I don't know if it was that day or a different day, attempted to recruit other students to assault King, but no one seemed interested. He then told one of King's friends to say goodbye to him because she would never see him again. That's
so it was very premeditated.
Oh yeah, it was super. He I think that something switched off in his head, and it was like, I'm never gonna be able to not be bullied about this unless I kill this kid.
It's really sad because this kid was 13. Like,
yeah. Like, and he was being...
It's crazy that somebody at that age...
And he was being
like,
bullied
I'm gonna kill somebody.
by... Maybe not King. There is some, like, people that think that was the case.
Like, he was bullying him.
But he was being bullied by his friends, by his peers, the people that he played basketball with, like his, kind of,
his social group.
So that's stressful for a 13-year-old kid.
Oh, definitely.
Not that we're justifying what happened.
But I think that there's something to say about how his reaction as a 13-year-old was to kill him. Well, because of his environment that he grew up in.
Yes, exactly.
Totally.
So it all goes back to the fact that neither of these kids had a great, I don't know, parents. Like, they had no good role models, really, about how to live life.
It's also a violent area. Like, violent things happen all the time in Ventura. Like, all the time.
Well, in Oxnard,
yeah.
Well, Ventura County.
Okay, so then that was all on February 11th. And then on the morning of February 12th, witnesses say that they could see Brandon repeatedly looking at King during a class in the computer lab. And he was...
Those labs were so small,
yeah,
too.
and he was behind him. I don't know exactly how many rows behind him, but he was behind him in the class. At 8:15 a.m., so, like, right after school started, I had heard at one point back when I was, like, younger, that it was during the Pledge of Allegiance, so that's why everyone was standing up.
I think I remember hearing that.
McInerney shot King twice in the back of the head with a .22 caliber revolver, which he had taken from some of his relatives.
I think it was his uncle.
Somebody in his family. McInerney then tossed the gun down and walked from the classroom. So at this point he wasn't running, and it's not clear to me really if he started running in the school or if he was trying to, like, not seem suspicious, and started running once he got outside the gates. He was later apprehended by police about 7 minutes later. That was, like we were saying, that was when we had to go into lockdown because he was outside of school running.
And they thought we were fairly close at our elementary school.
But, of course, this was, like, an isolated incident. It wasn't like a school shooting that we hear about now, where the person's just trying to kill anybody they can.
Or, like, a list.
He was purposely killing one person, or... Yeah. King was transported to St. John's Regional Medical Center, where I think it was one day later, on February 13th, he was declared brain dead, but he was kept on life support for 2 days so that his organs could be donated. So we've already discovered where this happened. This was in E.O. Green Junior High School in Oxnard, California, and it was around Valentine's Day. So let's move on to the why and the how, which is where it really gets into it, and then we'll also talk about, like, the trial, because that was a big portion of why this got so much media coverage, and people like Ellen DeGeneres and Hillary Clinton and stuff, like, spoke out about it. So the why Brandon killed him is pretty obvious at this point, but Larry would tell the boys who harassed him that they were attractive and asked if he could sit with them at lunch. He would also say, he would, like, taunt the boys that harassed him by saying, "I know you want me," in the halls between classes. This is all, like, testimony or witnesses saying these things. So that's pretty, to me, that seems like that's clearly the motive behind Brandon, obviously, is that he felt threatened. And for all we know, maybe Brandon was exploring his own sexuality and he didn't know, maybe he thought that he could have been, like, bisexual or gay.
Internalized homophobia is a thing.
And maybe that's why he felt so threatened by someone saying those things to him, because he was second-guessing his own self. So now we'll get into the trial, which is lengthy. There is a lot happening in the trial. So, again, like I said, there was condolences expressed by many. It was a highly publicized case because it did have to do with a possible hate crime. Eventually the hate crime charge did get dropped. But so Senator Hillary Clinton and Ellen DeGeneres both spoke out, like, in, I don't know, like, condolences kind of this case. Then this is where I was talking about how it's kind of interesting that how Gregory and Dawn King reacted to this whole thing, which is Larry's adoptive parents. Gregory himself believes that Larry was sexually harassing McInerney and has expressed concern that Larry is being made a poster child for gay rights. Of course, Gregory King and Dawn King have also said multiple times to the media that they're, of course, like, horrified that this happened to their child, and they feel really bad about, like, this entire thing. But Gregory, like, really does believe that Larry was sexually harassing McInerney to some extent.
But these are the same parents that reported him for stealing food from his own fridge.
Well, yeah, that's, like, take it with a grain of salt, but his own father. So that, to me, that just cements in my mind that his connection with Larry was not good. Mm-hmm. So February 2008, which was right after the shooting occurred, they began considering asking for a change of venue because of the publicity of the trial. They being the defense for Brandon. In July 2008, Judge Douglas Daly of Ventura County Superior Court ruled that McInerney would stand trial as an adult.
Wow.
And there was multiple, like, appeals to that, and every single time it was shot down. Like,
he's 13.
Yeah, he was 13 at the time.
Absolutely insane. Like, I think it's weird to charge, like, a 16-year-old for as an adult. Like,
16 I could see, but anything 15 or below is, like, that's a child.
Well, where's the cutoff, right? Like, technically the cutoff should be 18.
Yeah, but, like, 16, it depends on the scale of the crime.
Yeah, how heinous it is.
And so the thing about this crime is, like, he was shot execution style. Like, there was no...
And it was premeditated.
There was no, like, ifs, ands, or buts. Like, it wasn't like he just, like, saw him in the schoolyard and, like, shot him in the leg or something. He shot him execution style in the back of the head 2 times for the purpose of murdering him. I will say it's important to mention, I suppose, that Brandon has said multiple times that he never said it. He never testified in court, but he did say, like, multiple times to his own, like, you know, lawyers that he was upset that he had done it, and if he could go back, he wouldn't have done it. But of course,
as a 13-year-old,
yeah,
13-year-olds are
impulsive.
Right?
Like when I was a 13-year-old, I don't think I would have killed anybody, but I probably would have done things that I would have regretted.
The hormones, like, because your hormone levels are not balanced at all, and like it could easily,
I agree with the impulsive,
like, influence your behavior,
which is why we keep guns away from children, because they can't make rational it sounds mean and, like, condescending, but children literally have no ability to make rational decisions because of
their prefrontal cortex is
their
not
brain
fully
is
developed.
not developed.
Mm-hmm. Most men is not developed till you're like 23. So
which goes back to, when are you considered an adult?
True. Yeah.
Like, what?
Well, and if his mother, this is a little bit off track, but if his mother was doing drugs while he was in utero,
It's possible.
he could have easily had brain deterioration and therefore didn't have.
I will say, though, it was testified multiple times that he was, like, an incredibly bright child. Like, he was very smart.
Yeah, I see what you're saying.
And another side note, that it was testified a few times that he possibly drew Nazi symbols. Like, doodled Nazi symbols. However, then there's, like, a bunch of people that are like, he was not a Nazi. He was not. This had nothing to do with race. Larry King was also at least partially African American. So that's important to mention, that I see what you're saying, but I don't know, based on what I've read, I feel like he might not have been developmentally delayed at all.
I see.
He probably has a slew of other issues, like, related to his home life and his childhood, but I think he was a smart kid, or it seemed like from the evidence that I got that he was a smart kid.
It's really tragic to think that he was tried as an adult, but he was clearly showed remorse. Like, sure, it was premeditated, but the thing with premeditation is any jury is going to see it like this. They're going to be like, at any time between him stealing the gun from his uncle or whatever and the time that he shot Larry, like, at any time you could have stopped. And that's, like, what influences courts usually to be like, it was premeditated, it was malicious, like, yeah. It's one of those things, though, it's like, I can't remember the name of the phenomenon, but it's like people after, like, a huge thing happens,
remember
they're like,
things incorrectly.
Oh, we saw this, saw this, like, oh, in hindsight we saw this, like,
it's also happens in like, eyewitness accounts.
Yeah,
they can say things totally wrong just because our brain takes the information that we want it to take. Like, it doesn't.
Well, yeah, and after people saw that,
true.
After he killed somebody, you were like, oh, maybe I did see him draw Nazi symbols. Yeah, I see what you guys are saying. It's a good point. So then in August 2008, so the next month, McInerney pleaded not guilty to premeditated murder and a hate crime. In September 2008, the court appointed Willard Wixell, which is a lawyer from Ventura, to be his guardian ad litem for McInerney, which I don't know if you know more about that, but I think that all that means basically is that he is acting, like, as his guardian
while he's going
so he can make, like, legal decisions for him, because his parents probably were unable to do that.
His father is at this point still alive, but we'll get to that in a second. October 2008, McInerney was when McInerney and Willard Wixell, Willard is such an interesting name, just a side note, fired his public defender, who he was assigned at the very beginning, which was William Quest, and hired Robin Bramson from the United Defense Group, so a lawyer from the United Defense Group. So after Willard was named the guardian ad litem for McInerney, they started to take steps to fire William Quest and the public defender's office for relatively obvious reasons, if you guys know anything about public defenders. Not that those people are bad people, but they just don't have the funding and the time.
And they're not always in your best interest.
Right. And hire the United Defense Group, which was a criminal defense law firm from Los Angeles. And then at first, the public defender's office filed a petition stating that the United Defense Group might not have McInerney's best interests in mind. The public defender's office was trying to keep Brandon under their
Care.
care.
Okay.
So they filed a petition stating that United Defense Group might not have McInerney's best interests in mind. But eventually that was found obviously not to be the case. And then the court also denied a motion to gag the defendant's former representatives from the public defender's office from speaking out about the case. So that's interesting. In December 2008, there were a lot of tests up to this point that have been done by psychiatrists and psychologists to see if McInerney was competent to stand trial, and it was ruled in December 2008 that he was competent to stand trial. Also in December 2008, Scott Wippert of the United Defense Group filed a motion for discovery to uncover whether the prosecutors exercised discretion in sending McInerney's case to adult court. So again, there were multiple different times that people were like, he shouldn't be tried as an adult. We're going to try to figure out why they said that he was.
It's interesting.
So Judge Rebecca Riley denied the motion in December 2008. In March 2009, so the next year, this case goes on for a really long time. The preliminary hearing was postponed when William McInerney, who is Brandon's father, was found dead. It wasn't like malicious. It seemed like he fell when he was working on a property. Could have possibly been like a contractor. Judge Riley granted Brandon permission to leave juvenile detention facility that he was in to attend his father's funeral. August 2009, so a couple months later again, in his arraignment, McInerney pleaded not guilty to all charges again. So the judge, Bruce Young, set the pretrial hearing date for October 2009 and a trial start date for December 2009. So at this point, it's been over a year. Mm-hmm. In September 2009, the addition of the lying in wait allegation to the list of charges meant that his case would automatically be tried in adult court, which, from my understanding, lying in wait basically means that you were waiting. Like you were like if you were to like hide around a corner and wait to kill somebody, that's lying in wait.
Oh, I see.
So if it was during the Pledge of Allegiance and he was just waiting for everybody to stand up so he could kill him, that would make sense to be lying in wait.
See, all of these like things make it seem like I can't believe a 13-year-old did this. You know?
So in criminal law, lying in wait refers to the act of hiding and waiting for an individual with the intent to kill that person or inflict serious bodily harm. Okay. So
it basically means that it's premeditated by nature.
Premeditated by nature, but also like saying that it was so premeditated that he was waiting possibly to the exact minute to do it. Right? Like waiting for like the perfect time like in his brain.
Weird.
Well, and it's essentially saying because it was premeditated, that's why he's being tried as an adult.
Yeah. So then there was a big gap here. In July 2010, the trial was again postponed and a hearing was scheduled for April 2011. So that's 3 years.
By this time I was
at the school.
I was in 8th grade,
Mm-hmm.
about to leave 8th grade.
Yeah.
In August 2010, Judge Charles Campbell ruled that the trial would proceed in Ventura County, so there was no change of venue, and that the jurors would be selected from Santa Barbara County, which is a little bit further away. Either way, you're going to hear about it. There was articles in like the LA Times. So
well, and like Ellen DeGeneres,
right, exactly,
who has a TV show,
yeah,
and is like a gay icon, was talking about it. So
in July 2011. Trial began with change of venue to Chatsworth, Los Angeles. So I don't know what happened between August 2010 and July 2011, but they did do a change of location, change of venue.
Jail this whole time?
Yeah.
Okay, cool.
He was at a juvenile detention facility. We'll get to that and how that worked into his sentencing. The prosecution's big, like, kind of, I don't know, like, general way they portrayed McInerney was that he was a popular kid who was skilled in martial arts and shooting guns, and he was a white supremacist.
Oh, they like brought that up in court.
Yes. The defense, on the other hand, was saying that they described King as the aggressor, saying he was sexually aggressive and was provoking McInerney.
So it was like a brutal trial is what you're trying to say.
Yes.
Because they were basically pitting these two kids against each other.
And these are children. Like, that's kind of the craziest part to me, is that these are two kids that they're trying to make they're trying to make this case make sense to the jury.
I also want to say that, can you even, I mean, yes and no, but can you even be a white supremacist at 13? Because really all of your ideas at that point are coming from your, like, social influence. So generally your parents, which is a lot of the times why people's political ideas change as they get older.
It could be that he was hanging out with kids who, and they all kind of were like, oh, like, this is kind of fun, this is kind of cool, it makes us different. Mm-hmm. Like, I don't know, I'm almost theorizing.
Almost kind of like a gang.
Yeah.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. So, but I just want to say that we need to consider that he was a child, mm-hmm. and so a lot of the times rational thought just isn't there.
Yeah. Mm-hmm. Yeah. That's a good point.
I mean, people would disagree with you.
I know people would disagree with me, but I'm like a firm believer that children...
It's hard to see consequences,
and they just
shouldn't
be held accountable for their
they
political
should be.
And social views at, like, when they're older.
Yeah.
I mean, this is different because there's violence involved, but an example that I'm thinking of is if a student or somebody said, like, the N-word when they were young and then went on to apologize for it when they're, like, 20, they didn't know...
Mm-hmm. Like, or they might not have known.
They might not have known the weight of it socially and, like, culturally at that age. Sure. And they're getting all their influence, most of their influence, depending on the family, from their parents mm-hmm. at that age. And so when you go on in life and grow up and make your own decisions and realize this was wrong, I think we should accept, if they're being honest, their apology. Which you can edit that out if you want to, but I just thought that was... food for thought.
Yeah, definitely.
So that's, to me, one of the saddest parts about this entire case is that it's two, in my opinion, it's two deeply troubled children who probably both didn't know the weight of their actions because, hear me out, technically, if Larry King was actually saying the things that he was saying, like, I know you want me, and, like, all these kind of...
harassing.
It's a little bit sexually harassing.
But it's not worth murder.
And so, to be clear, yes, I'm not saying that you should... Because what if, like, us as young women who
we were sexually harassed all the time
right, like, school. What if we had been sexually harassed and had killed somebody? Like, so... I'm not saying that McInerney was necessarily, like, making a good decision, because he wasn't.
But like they were both in the wrong.
Yes, that's what I'm saying, sort of, is that it's so sad because they were both deeply troubled, and there was obviously, like, sexuality involved, which is, like, a highly charged subject when you're in middle school and you don't know really anything about yourself. That I see why it escalated to the point that it did.
Also,
I guess
they're
is
both
what I'll say.
Children, and they don't know how to, once again, rationally handle this situation as would be appropriate to somebody like an adult. So, generally, an adult would handle it by, like, going to HR if it was in the workplace, or, like, speaking to them. So, I just think that we need to, like, recognize that they're children, and that if they were older, and they're troubled, but possibly if they were older, it would have gone down differently because mm-hmm. they would have had the capacity to solve the issue without taking violent actions.
Mm-hmm. It is important to mention, though, that Brandon, like we said earlier, he did try to, like, recruit some of his friends to just at least assault Larry.
Yeah, like, beat him up or something.
Yeah, so
which is not better,
like
but
not better. But that's what I'm saying. That seems more kind of like
his speed.
What a kid would, like, more rationally decide to do. Anyway, okay, moving on from that. After much deliberation and arguing, Brandon, so like I said, there was a lot of back and forth, especially in, like, the pre-trial, to have Brandon McInerney tried as an adult. And there was a lot of, like, back and forth. Most people did not agree with that.
Well, it's weird because that's kind of, like, the judge gets to make that decision, mm-hmm. right?
And it from my understanding, it mainly came down to that lying in wait allegation that was added to the list of charges. And at that point, it had, like, legally, I believe, it had to have him be tried as an adult.
If they were going to include that charge.
Yeah. So there were students and teachers and like principals and stuff that testified in the case. So students testified that King had been made fun of, which we clearly know. That some witnesses said that they never noticed King making any sexual advances, and any sexual comments were just to mess with McInerney or any other person for that matter. So it was kind of, especially probably students that were okay with the way he was expressing himself and didn't feel threatened by him. They thought that any sexual comments he was making were just kind of like his way to make a joke and cope with the situation because he was being bullied. To me, it seems like both of them were being bullied and bullying. Yeah. Mm-hmm. Joy Epstein, who was the former vice principal, one of the former vice principals of E.O. Green, that school had like the most freaking principals ever. There was
one per grade,
one per grade, and then there was also like a general school principal, I believe. Mm-hmm. So she was the former vice principal of E.O. Green. She's the one that's gotten the most slack. She testified that King could wear what he wanted, and it was not a violation of the dress code.
I like that she's sticking to her guns, though.
Yeah, she's sticking to that because it seems like she did a lot of like research, and she asked like anyone and everyone like, what should I do in a situation like this? And she stuck with the fact that legally it was not a violation of the school dress code. Another teacher testified that pupils told her that King would follow them into the bathroom, which I think we could probably all agree would be considered sexual harassment to some extent if that was the truth, if that is correct and actually did happen. Then Dawn Boldrin, who was an English teacher at the school, testified that she had, like I was mentioning this earlier, she had encouraged him not to wear attention-getting clothing if he did not want to receive negative attention. This is an interesting part. She also gave Larry a strapless green chiffon gown that she intended for him to wear outside of school. She didn't say explicitly that she intended for him to wear it outside of school, but interesting.
That's really weird.
Yeah.
But it almost seems like she was trying to kind of support him and help him.
So it seems like she was telling him, don't do any of this stuff at school, but I still support you as a person. Anyway, at this point in the trial, a photo of him wearing the dress was shown in court, which caused many people to start crying, including, and there was like a lot of emotion just in general, including with the King family themselves. And Gregory King got up and gathered his family, the people that were there,
and
the
King
left? Family, and told them and grabbed them to leave. Not before Dawn King,
that's his adopted mom.
Yes, swore at Dawn Boldrin's 13-year-old daughter and a relative who was sitting there as well. Dawn King at this point was barred for the remainder of the trial. So there was also a lot of emotion.
You can't swear in court.
There was a lot of emotion going on at that point.
Why were they so upset about a picture of him wearing a dress?
So here's my theory. Hear me out. I think maybe Larry King's parents, Gregory and Dawn, didn't necessarily accept that he was gay or bisexual,
which
or
probably only made it worse.
It is.
Or I hate to say that like that, but probably only made his behavior at school worse. Then.
Right.
And it kind of explains the harassment
and why his teacher would give him a dress because his parents don't
want him wearing dresses.
I don't know. Yeah. Mm-hmm. And then this is quotes again from Dawn Boldrin. It was reported more than once. I assume means the harassment either way, was reported more than once by more than one person. It was documented. There is paperwork on this. She, referring to Assistant Principal Joy Epstein, that's in like parentheses, kept saying that she didn't know, and she did. She knew. She did. Everybody knew.
So this is the teacher that saw all the red flags.
Yeah.
I was saying before, like, nobody saw any crazy red flags, but this teacher sounds like she did.
So to me, it seems like every teacher and every student saw red flags, but it was almost like they didn't want to say anything because
it was a tricky subject.
It was like a tricky subject. Like,
somebody died for it.
Yeah. Do we say,
because they were trying to save face?
Well, do we say, okay, because if you say that Brandon is bullying, or Brandon and other students are bullying Larry because of his sexuality, that's not okay. But then is Larry King also bullying and possibly sexually harassing other students, that's not okay either. So there was like this weird situation and like
it's like people were like, oh, they're bullying each other, so it cancels out.
Yeah, maybe. In the first trial, there were 8 weeks of testimony and almost 100 different witnesses. So like I said, students, teachers, everything. Quick little fact about Joy Epstein. They just in general, a lot of people kind of said that Joy Epstein was trying to push her agenda, quote unquote. And that's why she like never,
as in the gay agenda.
Yeah, took any
she was trying
thing
to
literally, or
children.
like she never took anything and made something of it because she wanted, I don't know.
I see what you're saying.
It's just something that I found. The last jury vote of the first trial had 7 jurors voting for voluntary manslaughter, and then 5 voted for either second or first degree murder. So voluntary manslaughter, those people that believe that would mean that the crime of killing another person unlawfully in circumstances that do not amount to murder. So, for example, without premeditation or as a result of mitigating circumstances. So that would be like the bullying between both parties, right?
Oh, that somehow made it like they weren't as responsible.
Somehow justified. And then first degree murder is generally defined as an unlawful killing that is both willful and premeditated, meaning that it was committed after planning or lying in wait, in quotes, for the victim. Okay, then typically second degree murder is defined as a murder that is not premeditated or murder that is caused by
reckless conduct.
So to me, second degree murder and voluntary manslaughter are kind of similar, but voluntary manslaughter,
it probably has a different sentence.
Yeah, so voluntary manslaughter, it specifies that the crime of killing another person and unlawfully in circumstances that do not amount to murder. So it's not murder if it's manslaughter. I don't know, that's interesting.
I think manslaughter is intended maybe to be like they intended to do harm or
in the heat of the moment,
but they didn't intend to murder them.
Which that I don't know how 7 people voted for that because that's not the
case. It seems like, I mean, I wasn't there for the trial obviously, but it seems like they proved premeditation.
Clearly, it was premeditated.
Yeah. Like I don't 100%. Think you can necessarily say
he brought the gun to school.
Yeah,
which would be premeditation, wouldn't it?
Yeah.
And they moved it to adult court just for the lying in wait charge.
Yeah.
The defense attorney had chosen to pursue the gay panic defense strategy, and basically saying that King was bullying McInerney and that he had no way out. The criminal podcast covers this case as well. I can't remember what it's called, but they talk a lot about the gay panic defense. I'll give a quick little summary of what the gay panic defense is. It's a legal strategy in which a defendant claims that they acted in a state of violent temporary insanity because of unwanted same-sex sexual advances.
So I have read a decent amount on the internet about the gay panic defense, and like it's weird because like I never would have known that was like a thing,
a term,
or even close to a valid excuse.
But a lot of people use it as an excuse. It's basically like not so much an illegal term, but like in my mind, it's them being like, I was afraid for my life solely because this person was gay, and it made me crazy. And it just, a lot of people use this defense to justify hate crimes. And I think that it's important that we, like, we call hate crimes for what they are.
Which this was not ruled to be a hate crime, just side note.
Yeah.
But I think it wasn't ruled to be a hate crime because of the bullying that went on both sides.
Yeah. Yeah. So the real problem with the gay panic defense is that it dehumanizes gay people as to say, like, that they're so, like, disgusting, or dangerous, which is not true, like, at all. However, I will say this, I can understand, just like if I cut out everything except for what it says, that King was bullying McInerney and McInerney felt like he had no way out. I could see how that was how Brandon felt, possibly. Because if he was getting these unwanted sexual sort of advances from King, and then he was also getting bullied by his peers, I could see how he felt trapped and how he had no way out. Still don't at all say that that does not make me think that murder was the way to go about this. But just as a side note, I kind of understand why that would cause you to feel so trapped. Not because Larry King is gay. Honestly, what if I had, as like a straight cisgender woman, had somebody, like a man, that was giving me, like, saying unwanted sexual things to me, and my peers were bullying me for some reason for this, like saying that I was a slut or whatever, and I felt like I had no way out, I, as like a sensible woman, would not kill anybody.
So even
but
at
I could
13, I wouldn't have done that.
No, but I could see why you would feel trapped, because you would kind of feel trapped if, like...
I like your like, analogy of taking it out of the gay, like, arena, and, like, being, hey, it's less about the fact that he was gay, it was more about unwanted advances.
And that's, to me, why I think that they dropped the hate crime.
But I think that, regardless, a rational 13-year-old would not, regardless of the gay
right, and
part,
I think we've cemented that like, you wouldn't do that.
They're not, I mean, they grew up in a totally different, same area, but totally different social environment than we did.
Yeah,
like,
definitely.
we were very lucky.
Yeah.
The way that we grew up,
So the first trial was declared a mistrial because they voted multiple times and there was...
Nobody could agree.
No, they did not reach a unanimous verdict.
Well, and honestly, each charge usually carries some kind of minimum sentence, and I'm sure some of the jurors were like,
he doesn't deserve that long.
I can't, like, morally vote for this charge knowing that he's gonna get such and such time in prison.
So I assume voluntary manslaughter is the lowest in the amount of, like, years, and then second degree murder, and then first degree murder. I think that's my understanding. Which would make sense that there was majority of the people voting for voluntary manslaughter using kind of your reasoning that they don't want to put him away for that long. They just can't, like, morally do that to a 13-year-old.
I'm just saying that we know so little about, like, in the grand scheme of things, we know so little about the differences between adults and children still. Like,
brain-wise.
We really can't come to a conclusion, it seems like, especially by looking at this case, we can't come to a conclusion of, like, how are children and adults fundamentally different, and what age do they become fundamentally
and it's
different
for every single person.
Yeah.
So that's to take into consideration too, is that somebody, regardless of gender, could be fully emotionally and, like, psychologically developed at 18, and then there could be student or people of the same gender that aren't developed fully emotionally and psychologically until they're, like, 23.
Yeah, totally.
So it depends on your environment and, like, so many outside factors that we can't just set a baseline for everything, and that's why the whole thing of charging them as an adult is weird, because there's probably some adults over 18 that should be charged as children, but mentally could be considered children.
Yeah, but, like, the law doesn't care. Like, that's
they
the thing.
don't.
Like, in this case, Hannah's gonna get to it, they eventually had to come to, like, a decision. Like, somebody had to make a decision. We'll never know if it was, like, the right decision in the moral compass of life, but...
Okay, so then in the second trial, the last trial, the final trial, the prosecutors dropped the hate crime charge because I think that maybe that would cause even more, like, disruption between, like, whether or not they can come to a unanimous verdict. That's kind of my understanding between that. Because, again, it was a different time, and so some people might have thought that was a hate crime, but then some might not have, and so that would have just been another point of contention in coming into a unanimous verdict.
I see.
On November 21st, 2011, McInerney pleaded guilty to second-degree murder, voluntary manslaughter, and a use of a firearm. just sit with that for a second. He was sentenced to 21 years behind bars, starting in a juvenile facility and moving to a prison upon turning 18. And he had no credit given for time served prior to the trial or for good behavior. So he was in juvie for 3 years at this point, a little bit over 3 years. And he got no credit given. So 21 years starting on November 21st, 2011.
Do you happen to know when he's eligible for parole?
He will not get credit for the nearly 4 years he has served or be eligible for parole.
Oh.
So no matter what, he will not get out
before
prison.
he's 38.
Yeah.
Gotcha.
Okay.
Which, it's so weird because my frame of reference is for adults, you know? And in my head, I'm like, that person murdered that other person in cold blood. If they were an adult, they should be in jail for way longer than that. But, like, then also on the flip side, I'm like, 21 years is a long time.
Mm-hmm.
Like, it's weird how, like, everything is relative.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Like,
and also he, like, grew up in jail.
Yeah, totally.
So even when he gets out,
juvie.
he's not really going to be able to be fully
He's probably going to have a lot of
Yeah.
behavioral issues, unfortunately.
And
Which
then,
is want to say that's the problem with our country's jail system is we don't really focus a lot on, like,
Rehabilitation
and getting them back into, I mean, it varies on area, but I think we could do a better job of that.
Yeah. And then final sentence of the case notes that I have is that King's family does support the court's decision, but they still believe that school officials hold deep responsibility for what happened. So no matter how you put it, they still think that the school officials who were essentially, like, almost complicit in the bullying had something.
Well, they weren't doing anything about it, is the thing.
Well, and it was like, it was such a sensitive subject that they were basically like, well, we can't tell somebody to stop expressing themselves the way they want to, but we can tell people, I don't know, it's just like it's a tough subject.
And I think that I'm not even sure that it got to them, to administration, that there was a sexual harassment, like,
so
verbally kind of a factor to play into
Maybe
that.
not, yeah.
If they didn't know about that, then I could see them thinking that, I mean, King wasn't doing anything wrong, in my opinion, other than that. And so if they didn't know about that, I can see why they wouldn't have done anything.
And it changes between who you ask, because that's why there were so many witnesses on this case, is because some witnesses were saying flat out that this was sexual harassment. I understand why Brandon did what he did. It makes sense to me. Some, and teachers knew. That's what some people were saying, is that, like, the teachers knew that this was sexual harassment, blah, blah, blah. Then there's, like, the other side of things that are saying, like, oh, even if teachers did know about what Larry was saying to Brandon and other students, presumably, it wasn't, like, bullying. It was just kind of, like, his way to cope with it, almost. Or jokingly. That sort of thing. So, I don't know. That's kind of just my thoughts on that. I don't know. It's really confused. There was a lot more to this than I thought there was going to be.
I've seen a couple interviews with teachers. Weren't you saying that there was, like, that one lady that, like, was more in, like, not quite the same words, but saying, like, oh, like, he had it coming?
More or less, there was one teacher that did, like, an interview where she basically said that she personally doesn't believe that she would have killed anybody, but she understands where Brandon was coming from.
Yeah. Which
is a little jarring to hear, but I also kind of understand where they're coming from, because if it was to the point of, like, sexual harassment, I mean, I still wouldn't have killed anybody, but still, do you know what I mean? If it was sexual harassment, I could understand why someone felt so threatened by that.
It's so sad, because this is, like, doesn't even feel real. It's like a movie. It's like, kids don't kill kids. Like, That's not like a common thing. I mean, I guess school shootings, it's usually a kid, right?
All right, so that's pretty much it for this one. Do you guys have any other final thoughts?
So I think that it was not handled well by pretty much everybody involved.
Well, and it's clear that nobody really knew what the right thing to do was with charging Brandon. Like, is sending him to jail for the rest of his life gonna bring Larry back? Like, is that gonna change anything? Is that gonna, like, is that gonna bring any justice to the situation, putting this 13-year-old in jail for a long time? I mean, he's still in jail for a long time, but, like, I think that's why the mistrial happened. So.
It seems like a lot of people in the jury and involved in the case thought that there was hope for Brandon, sort of, to kind of come
especially
back from this.
Especially because he expressed remorse.
Expressed remorse, and he also, I mean, like we're saying, it was definitely possible that he was being sexually harassed by Larry King. So, I don't know. Do you have anything else to add?
No.
Horribly sad case, but I just have to put, like, a disclaimer in here. From growing up in this area, going to the same school, this was not at all how I would have talked about this, like, 10 years ago. But once I did all this research on this, I was like, okay, it is not as black and white as I thought it was. That's just kind of a lot of the
opinions that I formed about it were, you know, it was like, oh my god, this kid shot this other kid and he died.
Which is horrible.
Because as a kid, it's not so, you don't have, like, the multi-dimensional reasoning.
You're just like, murder is wrong.
You're like, murder is wrong.
Which it is.
Yes.
Like, that's crazy.
And I haven't changed my opinion on that. Murder is wrong. But there's so, I guess what I'll just say as, like, a final thought,
is justice served here?
There's so much more going on than what I once thought. There's a lot of, like, gray area versus black and white kind of facts. So thanks for sticking with us for this episode. It was a little bit of a long one and a little bit of a doozy. But don't forget to follow us on Instagram at Who What Where Podcast, and you guys can let us know down below in the comments any thoughts or questions you might have about the case or any tips. And then we also have a YouTube that we post the video version of the podcast to, and you guys can check us out there at Who What Where Podcast as well. And if you want to leave any comments on those videos, you can as well, and we'll respond to them too. Thanks for listening, guys. We'll see you in the next one.